El subjuntivo, las cláusulas con el subjuntivo. We find ourselves in a situation now where, having done the three main causes of subjunctive and having looked at situations where a noun that is described by a clause then uses the subjunctive if the noun described doesn't necessarily exist, we move on to conjunctions that cause the subjunctive sometimes. Some of them seemingly will cause you problems, but once you get down the system, you will not have any issues. That's because the problems are really in your head and you will get them sorted out. See? You'll straighten it out. So first of all, let's look at some conjunctions that are never followed by the subjunctive. This will get you off to a start with a calming look at expressions that don't need the subjunctive ever. When you say ahora que, dado que, puesto que, and ya que, these conjunctions are followed by expressions in the indicative. Let's look at some examples. Te doy una A ahora que estudias más. Now that you're studying more, I'll give you an A. Ahora que shows that the verb estudiar, when it's conjugated, is a verb already in action. It's really happening, and so you use the indicative. Te doy una A dado que estudias mucho. Given that you study a lot, I'm giving you an A. Okay? If it's a given, that means it's happening. Llevo una chaqueta puesto que llueve ahora. Since it's raining now, which means the rain is actually falling, I'm wearing a jacket. Te doy una A ya que estudias. Ya que estudias. You are studying. Since you're studying, and I can prove that, I'm giving you an A. And then we have some expressions that are always followed by the subjunctive. A menos que, con tal de que, en caso de que, para que, and sin que. We'll talk momentarily about why they use the subjunctive. But there's another important point, which is that if you don't have a change of subject from the first clause to the second verb, then you use an infinitive. These expressions can be followed by infinitives if you take off the que. Con tal de, en caso de, para, and sin. A menos que cannot be used in this structure. It'll always have a que and a conjugated verb in the subjunctive. Here's an example. Te doy una a menos que no estudies. Here we're saying that unless you don't study, which is still undecided, thus doubtful, I'll give you an A. Te doy una A con tal de que estudies. Provided that you study, which we're talking about a future studying that hasn't yet happened, I'll give you an A. Llevo una chaqueta en caso de que llueva, in case it rains. It hasn't rained yet, but it might. Estudias para que yo te dé una A, in order that I will give you an A, and I haven't done that yet, so that verb is in the subjunctive. No te doy una A sin que estudies, without you having studied at some point in the future. I will not give you an A. But compare them to the infinitive expressions. Recibes una A con tal de estudiar. Tienes un despertador en caso de dormirte en clase. Notice that the subject isn't changed. The person doing the main action is also doing the second action. Estudias para recibir una A, and no recibes una A sin estudiar. Right? And then we do get into some that are more complex. They're complex because sometimes they use the subjunctive and sometimes they use the indicative, with one exception, which makes it even more complex. Antes de que, cuando, después de que, en cuanto, hasta que, un tan pronto como. Let's look. Comeremos cuando Pedro llegue. The reason we use the subjunctive here is because Pedro has not yet arrived. Maybe this is why he hasn't arrived. It's entirely possible that if aliens grab him, he ain't gonna make it home to eat. Versus, comimos cuando Pedro llegó. We ate when he arrived. He did arrive, and that's when we ate. And so it's an indicative, which happens to be a preterite here. And there is Pedro eating with the fam. Right? Look, they're having burgers and corn on the cob. Holy cow. The aliens didn't come after him today, so he made it home. And the rest of the time expressions work the same way, that if the verb after the expression has occurred for sure, you use an indicative tense, and if not, you use the subjunctive. Después de que, en cuanto, hasta que, tan pronto como. But, need to be aware that antes de que always use the subjunctive, because always it talks about something that has not yet occurred, even in the past. And that's one of the issues with these conjunctions. The reason we studied the imperfect subjunctive forms is that you can use these expressions in the past to talk about something that had not yet happened at the time that the second verb took place. And that's why the subjunctive is your friend, because you can sort this out. Let's do a little practice with this. Mi hermana no conocía Washington antes de... All right, take a look at it. Antes de, there's no que, and that's because there's no change of subjects. We're using the infinitive. Antes de visitarme. No voy a trabajar sin que Western me... Okay, this expression, sin que, is always followed by the subjunctive, so it's pague, P-A-G-U-E. And me is not the subject, okay? Remember that. Western is the subject, paying me. Les doy su nota en cuanto el trimestre. You might want to pause while you think about these things if I don't give you enough time. So, en cuanto is a time expression that may be followed by the subjunctive. Let's see if the verb terminarse has occurred yet. The answer is no, because the trimestre isn't over yet. So it's se termine. The subject is trimestre. Iré a Seattle tan pronto como yo la escuela hoy. Have I left school yet? The answer is no, and I may never get to leave school. So it's deje, subjunctive, deje. D-E-J-E. Ana no escuchó la noticia hasta que Pedro a verla. Did Pedro come to see her yet? The answer is yes. Pedro vino a verla. Siempre como cuando yo a casa. Now it says siempre. When you see siempre, that makes it a timeless expression. This means that at some point I have arrived home, even if I haven't yet today. But I'm talking about always. This is habitual, and so it's llego. Siempre como antes de que ellos a casa. Now, there are two things in play here. One is that you have siempre, so that makes the expression somewhat timeless. But I also said that antes de que refers to an expression that by nature cannot have happened yet. Even when you use siempre, the main issue here is that antes de que will be followed by the subjunctive 100% of the time. Después de que ustedes el examen podemos ir a casa. You haven't yet taken the exam, so it's tomen, T-O-M-E-N. And we'll go home after that. Tenemos clase para que yo les explicar el subjuntivo. Okay, para que, there is an intentionality about this that you don't use unless it hasn't happened yet. So it's explique, Q-U-E. No van a aprenderlo bien a menos que ustedes estudiar. Unless you study. And I don't say unless if you already have studied. So this means that it hasn't happened yet, so we're going to use estudien. And there you have it. That's your subjunctive of adverbial clauses with conjunctions that trigger the subjunctive.